Okay.
Morning, guys.
Good
Morning,
morning,
Trevon.
Trevon. How are you?
I'm all right. How about you?
Good, good. Good to hear from you. I guess before we get started, do you guys need anything? Oscar, Amanda, Sam, Trevon? Anything I can help you guys with?
No, I just sent an email yesterday about the AMIA stuff. So other than that, I'm all good.
Okay, I responded. Yeah, the letter is really general, and the information about it is on the website.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Yeah, and I'm not affiliated with it at all, so I don't have like exact answers, but I've written these letters in the past, and it's really straightforward. They really just need like one paragraph saying that you did the work, you contributed to this. They just want to make sure people aren't trying to get into the high school program and just talking about work their mentor did. They want to make sure it's your work. And in years past, they also wanted to see if mentors could support travel, but it's going to be a virtual program this year. So, I don't think that you even need to write about that at all. But if they ask if that is important, as a program, we'll pay for your way to go to these things.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right, Trevon. We're all here for you, buddy. So you can share your screen anytime you want and do your presentation. Really look forward to hearing it. Oh,
Hey,
yeah.
wait a minute, don't-
Roger.
introduction.
Of course. Of course. We're
Yeah,
smaller
this is
than
what I
normal.
wait for. Well, it is a pleasure to introduce Trevon Johnshon, a student at Brashear High School with strong interests in medicine and chemistry, and especially in cancer medicine. He's earned the respect of a lot of people who have come to know him, people who appreciate his intelligence and his integrity especially. He's been through many tragic events and also many frustrations with the systems we have around that are not always accommodating folks that come from different backgrounds, but he's persisted through it all, and I have a lot of respect for that. So I've thoroughly enjoyed working with him, working through research literature, the ideas we've discussed, and the evidence. And with that, I would yield the floor to my colleague.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm sorry, but if you hear my nieces screaming in the background, I'm kind of multitasking.
Yeah, no worries. Same thing if you hear any of my kids in the background. So you're in good shape.
Should I share my screen and get started?
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right, this is Mammography and Breast Cancer, the History, Controversies, and Challenges by me and Roger Day. The early history of mammography. Rankin discovered X-rays in 1895. These were the first practical use. He compared X-rays of breast compared to removed breast tissue. This led to mammography, using low-energy X-rays to detect breast cancer in the form of tumors. In 1913, Albert Solomon performed 3,000 mastectomies compared them with X-ray images. These show that you can not only distinguish malignant tumors, you can also distinguish them versus non-cancerous tumors. This also showed how tumors spread to lymph nodes. And in 1950s, the breast compression technique was made, and it was standardized up until the 2000s, where full field mammography was developed. Controversies. There are many controversies that stem from mammography. Dangers such as overdiagnosis, how you assess the studies. Is mammography actually good at saving lives? And what's the correct age you should start screening at? Now we have framework. There are 3 types of breast cancers you can consider. There are birds. These are breast cancers that are growing too fast and treatment won't necessarily help. You can taken to the example of two screened patients, of one unscreened patient and one of them is screened. In this, the unscreened patient goes all this time without a diagnosis until they diagnosed up until this point. And then they die of breast cancer. The screened patient, this type of cancer is detected early, and it makes it seem as though because it was detected early, they had a longer lifespan. When in actuality, only because it was detected early did they assume that they had a longer lifespan, but any treatment that happened after it was detected did not help. They died around the same time. There are also turtles. These are breast cancers which grow too slowly and treatment isn't even needed. During this unscreened patient, there was no diagnosis because of the tumor, and the cancer did not even get diagnosed, and they usually die of some unrelated cause. In the screened patient, the cancer is detected early, and they get unnecessary treatment up until the time they pass away from a cause that isn't even the breast cancer. This makes it seem as though they had lived longer because of the detected cancer, when actually it never even helped them in the first place. For the lastly, we have the rabbits. These ones are fast enough to matter and slow enough to catch. You have the unscreened patient, and they are detected they aren't detected for the breast cancer up until this point. And shortly after they die from this, they actually die from the breast cancer. With the screened patient, it's detected early, and then you have effective treatment which leads to the cure of the breast cancer. One controversy is the controversy of overdiagnosis. For this, you would only want rabbits in order not to get overdiagnosed. Sears, a national registry for breast cancer for many decades, and Baylor and Welch used SEER, and concluded that mammography leads to massive overdiagnosis. More than all 30% of breast cancers detected by a screening mammography are overdiagnosed. So is breast cancer any good at saving lives? From 1995 to 2010, there had been a dramatic drop in breast cancer mortality. And between this time, the rate of death decreased by nearly 1/3, while incidence rose. Now, why was breast cancer mortality decreasing? Was it because of mammography, new treatments, changes in hormone use? So, and how much of that drop was actually from mammography? Well, the National Cancer Institute sent out a request for proposal, and in 2005, Donald Berry got the grant and funded several different modeling teams, and they concluded the fact that the total proportion of rate of death from breast cancer attributed to screening varied in the 7 different models, from 28% to 65%. So a large majority of the decrease was from a lot of screening during this time. Another controversy is the dangers from observational studies. Observational studies can be highly misleading. There is lead time bias in observational studies, such as when we talked about the birds. In the screened patient, it is detected, but this lead time up until their actual death makes it seem as though it was good. But when actuality, both of the patients had died around the same time. And when they were first detected, this actually did not help them at all. And it makes it look good when actually it's not any help at all. There's also biases such as length bias. Suppose there is a one-shot mammography screening and 6 patients take the screening. You can see right here that there are 3 fast-growing type of cancers. Only one of these cancers is actually detected. This is because usually the tumors grow fast enough and they die out, and they can only be detected 1/3 of the time. While the turtles, for example, these are slow-growing tumors, so they're able to be detected by mammography screenings a lot easier. You see, 3 out of 3 of these were detected. Now, this actually is very harmful to most studies because there's oversampling of turtles. And when this happens, it makes it seem as though mammography is actually did its job a little slightly too good, because the patients with the turtle type of cancers actually live longer and they don't even pass away from the said cancer. So for these oversampling, you can see there's 75% of the screens come from turtles, and that's very harmful to the studies. Now, the only way you can avoid these biases are by randomized clinical trials. They give a more dependable answer, and they can avoid these biases. Only one RCT, only one RCT has very high credibility, and it's the Canadian breast screening study. Otherwise, many studies over the year hold many biases, and they run rampant, such as one in the UK where there was a 13-year trial, and at first there was 80% of people who did at least one of the trials, and less than 50% came up for the next several years in their trials. Now, there are recommendations for breast cancer mammography. The U.S. Screening and Prevention Task Force issued evidence and recommendations for what ages to screen for mammography and breast cancer. In 1996, there was an A grade for screening from ages 50 to 79, and due to a weakness of a Swedish study, RCT, it had been downgraded to B grade from 2002 to 2016. Another evidence level and recommendation is for ages 40 to 49. It was insufficient between 1996, and it was eventually downgraded, placed into a C category from 2002 to 2016. There's also evidence levels for screening from ages 70 to 74. In 1996, there was a C grade, but it was ruled insufficient as the 2000s approached. For self breast examination, it was ruled insufficient in 1996, and then it was given a very low grade of D in the 2000s, which they urge people not to do, and they more rely heavily on just going to screenings and when it's the right age for you. And the evidence for digital mammography and MRIs is insufficient as of 2009 and 2016, as more studies are needed to accurately assess the good that these mammographies do. Now, as Europe backtracking, Europe, like the US, is very similar into the amount of cancer programs and screening that they occur in women. Recently, the Swiss Medical Board had questioned the wisdom of screening programs. This is largely due to the fact of the treatments and improvements that come with breast cancer. They believe that these improvements actually decrease the net benefit of early detection, and they're trying to get rid of screening altogether. Now, with that said, there are a lot of decision-making that plays into how you address cancer. There are many factors that you have to consider when trying to accurately assess what's the best choice. As you can see, there's individual factors that cause risk, such as age, family history, genetic exposures, etc. These account for your initial probability of cancer. Now, there's also risks such as false negatives, false positives that come after whenever you get screened. And these also attribute to the best choice for how you assess your decision. There's choices you have to make, such as whether to treat or wait for treatment, biopsies. There's also individual values, which you have to take into account when addressing what's the right decision for families and patients, such as the value of extended survival, harms of treatment, whether a patient will want to go through that, other harms such as adverse events, side effects, worry, and your probability of benefit from getting these said treatments. You have to consider all these values, and doctors must talk to their patients, and patients must take into account with their families what all to do and get the best treatment with the Bayes theorem. And you have to minimize your expected loss from all these factors that go into how you address aiding and supporting cancer patients. My acknowledgements are Dr. Roger Day. He really helped me during this entire everything, just dealing with the presentation. It was hard, and we had some hard work over the summer. He was really hopeful with dealing with all my unexpectancies and things that come with that, because he knew it was hard on me for the subject, and I really appreciate it. Thank you to Solomon and Dr. David Boone. You guys were really helpful and understanding, and I really appreciate everything. And even with all the COVID stuff, I really appreciate you guys giving me that time. And that's going to be all for my presentation.
Excellent. Great job, Trevon. All right, I'm going to unmute us all, and let's give him a round of applause that he deserves.
You guys.
All right. Great job, Trevon. Does anyone have any questions?
I can keep it up on the screen if you guys want to talk about it. No, I'll take questions.
So Trevon, really interesting work and great job doing the presentation. Some things that I've never really thought about whenever I've kind of accepted that mammography is excellent. Can you explain how, you talked a lot about length bias and lead time bias. Can you explain how random controlled trials are done for mammography that can correct or prevent this type of bias?
Well, these trials prevent the bias by, they have control groups and the experimental groups, and these trials take usually decades to complete, where they're being screened almost, every year, and there's follow-ups and a lot of other decisions that go with these trials, just to make sure that any bias that leads into these, there's not any more type of one-shot biases where they're not able to detect a certain type of cancer and oversample any other type of cancers. So they get like a wide variety of patients over an extended time, so that these biases aren't able to even come into play in the trials.
Excellent. So they do have a control group with no mammography at all that they follow for, and like you said, they must follow these patients for 20 years, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, they follow the patients a long time.
Yeah, which is the hard part about doing these types of trials, right? It takes decades before you realize if your intervention is working or not.
Yeah, these are the reasons why there's other biases in studies and why only one RCT is even credible, because as I said, even a UK study that took place over 13 years, almost 50% of patients didn't even follow up, and it's just really hard to assess, mammography, and people need to realize that. And there's also a lot of other things, such as people coming up with working on the Bayes theorem to accurately assess the right decision into going into how to accurately assess these cancers.
Yeah, excellent. Any other questions from anyone else?
I can ask a question if I can.
Yeah, of course.
I'm interested in this idea that there's a shifting groundwork all the time. So the treatments change all the time, risk factors change all the time, and the idea that this decision as to when to start screening and how often is really an individual decision, and there are so many individual characteristics that people have. that are not just the risk factors, but also what's going on in their lives and what they're able to tolerate or what's important to them. So I'm interested in wondering whether or not it's worthwhile to try to develop some ways to assist people in those decisions. I think we've talked before about how doctors can be pretty bad at figuring out what the probabilities really are after a mammography is positive. And so how can we maybe help doctors and patients and their families make better individualized decisions?
1 second, sorry. All right, so to accurately for yeah, as you said, some doctors aren't really the best at, going about decision making. So there's a whole bunch of things that doctors need to consider, and along with patients too. I feel as though patients don't know enough about mammography and breast cancer, and their only reliance is basically what their doctor tells them, and they hold that to like a very high standard. And I feel as though breast cancer patients need to always be aware of like risk and other things that come with it. So they, as you said, they got to take in the individual values and talk to family and just get a lot of different opinions on matters such as this, even emotional counseling, which I don't feel as a hospitals offer enough of.
Mm.
And they have to, all of these just go into like the right decision. And things such as Bayes theorem and decision principle, and like to minimize these expected losses and even the net benefit of everything that comes into how patients are, told what they're told and what treatment they're going to receive or whether to wait for it. These like all have to be in order and be told to actually make a difference in treating cancer and how we go about giving treatments and even the screening from mammography. You know, you're getting diagnosed with cancer from screening at, let's say, 42, and these are cancers that you're getting treatment for, but you could have been waited for them if you were like given the right advice. And these can actually do you more harm than good, and people just receive treatments and the doctors prescribe to them, knowing some doctors know that they're not even doing any good, and it's just to, gain profit for the hospital and giving them treatments overly priced on their insurance for things they don't even necessarily need.
Yeah, you read Otis Brawley's work on this, on how harm is done to patients. So I see that you absorbed a lot of those important messages.
Yeah. The healthcare system is very debatable in America. America as a whole spends probably the most on health costs in the entire world, and yet we seem to be behind the world in healthcare system. So we really need to work on these and hold everyone accountable, even doctors included.
Thank you.
Excellent, Trevon. Some really keen insights there. Does anyone else have any questions for Trevon?
Could you describe what the Bayes theorem is?
So there are a lot of things that go into the Bayes theorem. There's like PV values where you have these individual values such as extended survival, and there are also negative values where there are the adverse events, and these like take into account all the potential risk and all the potential benefits from a decision, which is ultimately the end result of the theorem. And there are a lot of like different values that go into assessing whether or not treating or waiting, like after getting a number from this theorem, would actually play a role, and it's going to play a role into what decision you have, either to wait or whether to get treated, and whether it's in like a discomfort zone and a neutral zone, or like a treat now type of zone where you have to get treated and you have to like take into all these accounts, and which one has the best possibility for you, and as an individual patient, which one would be the best recommendation for you to have. And you know, people are still trying to build these decision support tools and like to better like work around Bayes' theorem. And you know, it's all just a work in progress for, you know, treating breast cancer. And once this all, you know, gets developed, and they'll be able to like accurately assess whether a patient is getting the right treatment, and how, and this is like really important for going forward with cancer, and it's just going to play such a big impact in how mammography is implemented and how treating for a certain breast cancer is, you know, done in general.
Thank
Do you
you.
remember the work that Gigerenzer did on the doctors who were supposed to predict how much, what was the probability of breast cancer?
The false negatives.
Mammography.
Yeah.
They did a terrible, terrible job.
Yeah, they I think more than half of them got the answer wrong, and these are, you know, doctors, and you think they would be able to, you know, accurately get a question about whether false positives and false negatives would like play a role into how they, you know, treat their patients.
Mm-hmm.
But they actually, more than not, don't even understand what's going on behind the statistics and other factors.
Good.
Any last questions? If not, Trevon, that was excellent. Thanks for doing this, and Amanda and Sam, Oscar, thanks for signing on at the last minute and giving Trevon a bigger audience. Roger, thanks again for all of your work this summer with Trevon. Really nice job, guys. You did a really, really good job. So for the students, again, AMIA submissions are due in a few weeks. I'm here to help with all of that. So please keep submitting drafts, and I will keep editing and sending back comments until you guys have one that you're comfortable with. All right.
Can I ask a quick question, like a pretty
course.
quick question about the PowerPoint submission?
Mm-hmm.
So you said like if you're presenting a PowerPoint, it's better to keep the text on the PowerPoint minimal, but since they won't get to hear our voice and what we have to say about it, like, do you think the text like can be a little more developed in the PowerPoint?
You can. I think they will still mostly be looking at your abstract for this, and then they use your PowerPoint slides as kind of like a supplementary to see some more figures, right? So I think because of that, you can still leave it less text heavy. However, if you want to add text, you certainly can, because this isn't, if you're selected, the slides that you submit are not the slides that you necessarily have to present, right? So you can always switch back to something that's less text heavy afterwards too. So do what you feel is best to convey all of the work that you did.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Any other last questions? Oh, it's nice.
Thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, of course, Trevon. Yeah. All right. Well, I will send a message about our next meeting, but it won't be until probably September will be the first time we meet. I give you guys plenty of time away from me. And then before we get back together and start doing some things again, other than working kind of asynchronously on this submission. But you'll hear from me, as you already have a couple of times this week. So take care.
Bye-bye.
See you though.